The Minnesota Wild continued their hot play with a thrilling overtime win over the Nashville Predators. Seth Toupal is here to talk about the Wild as they prepare for their opening playoff series against the St. Louis Blues. That and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Locked On NHL podcast. So glad you could join us today, and thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Wild, Seth Toupal. And Seth, another thrilling win for your team. How much time was left on the clock when the game-winning goal was scored in OT?
It was something like right around a second, I think. It might have. You lose track when you are like me, sitting in front of your TV watching, and the overtime or the goal gets scored, and the immediate thing that you do is hop up and like start fist pumping everywhere. So I lost track a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's a buzzer beater, and the Wild pick up 2 much needed points against a team that, I'm going to be honest, I really am glad that I don't have to see again this year.
No love lost for the Nashville Predators, huh?
It's been just such a weird season series against the Predators because they have dominated up until this game, and it seemed like the Wilds, finally got some fight back on their end, and they were able to beat Nashville the Wild's way, and it looked like a Predators team that was gassed from playing the Lightning the night before. So, all in all, nice to finish the season series with a win, and now we look ahead to the final few games of the season before the inevitable playoff matchup against. Well, we already know who.
First playoff matchup to be set, the St. Louis Blues will face the Minnesota Wild. Your thoughts initially about that matchup? I know you'll be talking about it a lot on your show coming up, but where do you see the Wild having the biggest advantages over the Blues, and where are they most vulnerable?
Well, I think in terms of most vulnerable, I'll start with that one. It's going to be special teams. This Wild team has struggled with the penalty kill all season. The power play, it seems like, has gotten some things figured out that can work going forward, so that's encouraging. But it just the penalty kill has, especially in big games, been an Achilles heel for this Wild team, and so in order for them to have as good of a chance in this series as they should, penalty kill is going to have to come up big. And they had some good kills against Nashville, but then kind of got sucked into the style of play that has led to a lot of opponent power play goals. So hopefully that's just a minor fix. But the other thing to take away from this game, and I don't know, haven't seen the extent, Jared Spurgeon leaving with an injury. He played something like 5 minutes in this game. So the Wilds were playing 5 defensemen for the final 45, 47 minutes of the game. Obviously, at this point in the season, it's probably a precautionary measure, but I can't speak to that. But this Wild team is going to be fine if they can get most of the guys missing in the lineup right now healthy. And if that's the case, then they're going to hopefully beat the Blues at 5-on-5.
Yeah, that would be where they would want to go. And as far as the biggest advantage that you think the Wild have in this series?
I think it's probably going to be the two-headed attack of Kirill Kaprizov and Kevin Fiala. I mean, Kaprizov able to do this pretty much all season, and Kevin Fiala has at points even exceeded Kirill's production over this heater that he's on, that has basically been since Matt Boldy came up. Those are two guys that the Blues really have not had a strategy for. And so you can try to take away other things. You can try to take away one or the other, but the next team that finds a way to take both Kevin Fiala and Kirill Kaprizov out of the game will be the first. So I have to believe that those two guys are going to be able to swing the series in our favor, um, just because of how they've played for the last 3-4 months.
6 20-plus goal scorers on this Wild team. And last night, Joel Eriksson Ek, 3 points, 2 goals. Does that scoring depth mean a lot to this team heading into the postseason?
It does, and especially on special teams. Like, that was the big change that this Wild team has made, putting Kevin Fiala on the top power play line. And you put him with Kirill Kaprizov, with Joel Eriksson Ek, who has 11 power play goals this year. And teams are focusing on those two guys. And so that leaves Joel Eriksson Ek those opportunities right around the net to just cash in and come away with much needed goals. And so you look at him, not only that, but you look at Ryan Hartman, 30 goals himself, Marcus Foligno, a 20-goal scorer. Those guys have been able to help anytime teams try to key in on Kaprizov and Fiala, and having those guys that can step up and take over has been arguably one of the biggest reasons that this team is as successful as it has been.
You talked about the injury. If there is time missed heading into the playoffs, are you confident in the blue line depth on this team and who would have to step up?
It's an interesting question as to who would hop up into the D-core. Obviously, one of the routes you could go would be to bring up Kalen Addison, who hasn't played with the Wild much this year. My guess is that just because of how much time he has played with the team, that the Wild would go with Jordy Ben and probably end up sliding Alex Goligoski to the third pairing and kind of mix and match from there. But the big reason that the Wild went out and got a guy like Jacob Middleton is so that he could help on the top end of this D rotation. And he stepped up his play after Spurgeon went out. So he would be looked at to be kind of one of the lead guys along with Jonas Brodin if Spurgeon does miss any time. But I'm hoping that they're treating this the same way they did Matt Zuccarello and just pulling him strictly from a precautionary measure, because Arizona on Tuesday, if you need to give him a few days, you're not going to need him until after that Arizona game. And honestly, you wouldn't need him until the playoffs start, maybe get a game in. All in all, as long as guys are back by the time the playoffs start, that's the big picture.
All right, Seth, why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers where they could find you on social media and where they could find the podcast?
You're going to want to follow Locked On Wild, and easiest part is to just search Locked On Wild. You can do that for any of your favorite podcast platforms or on social media as well. Locked On Wild, all you need. You can also follow me on Twitter at Seth Toups, keeping you up to date on everything going on in the state of hockey with your favorites Minnesota hockey team, the Minnesota Wild.
All right, Seth Toupal, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.